Hardworking girl accidentally becomes a millionaire's assistant and falls for him. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. I'm sorry, Madeline, but the Morrison project is going to David. The words hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Madeline Sullivan gripped the edge of the conference table, her knuckles turning white against the polished mahogany. Around her, the glass walls of Henderson and Associates' 20th floor conference room seemed to close in, the Austin skyline beyond, blurring into meaningless shapes. David? The name came out strangled. David Henderson. Your nephew David, Richard Henderson, senior partner and owner of the firm, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. His silver hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment, Madeline saw something that might have been guilt flicker across his weathered features. David has been with the firm for 8 years. 8 years of schmoozing clients and taking credit for other people's work. Madeline's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Richard, I designed that entire downtown revitalization proposal. Every street, every building, every green space. You know that. The older man's jaw tightened. Now, David has the client relationships because you hand them to him on a silver platter. She leaned forward, her dark eyes blazing. How many projects have I brought in from concept to completion? How many times have I saved this firm from your nephew's mistakes? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Through the glass walls, Madeline could see her colleagues pretending not to watch, their eyes darting between their computers and the drama unfolding in the fishbowl conference room. Madeline, Richard's voice carried a warning. You're a valuable member of this team, but David is family. He's also the future of this firm. The future, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. A future built on mediocrity and nepotism. Richard's face hardened. I won't tolerate that kind of disrespect, and I won't tolerate watching 10 years of my life get handed to someone who couldn't design a parking lot without help. Madeline stood, her chair scraping against the floor. The Morrison project was my baby. My vision, my sleepless nights and weekend work sessions. Architecture is a team sport. Don't! She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't patronize me with team sport metaphors when you've just made it crystal clear that some players are more valuable than others. The conference room door opened, and David Henderson strolled in, his expensive suit and perfectly styled blonde hair making him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. He was carrying a leather portfolio that Madeline recognized. It contained her Morrison project designs. Sorry, I'm late, Uncle Richard. Traffic was murder. David's eyes landed on Madeline, and his smile turned predatory. Madeline, I wanted to thank you for all your preliminary work on Morrison. Really solid foundation to build on. Preliminary work. Foundation to build on. The words were carefully chosen, designed to minimize her contribution while positioning him as the architect of the vision. Madeline felt something cold and sharp settle in her stomach. Preliminary work. Her voice was quiet now, deadly calm. Is that what we're calling 18 months of research, community outreach, and innovative design solutions? David's smile never wavered. Well, you know how these things go. Ideas evolve. Clients change their minds. We'll probably end up scrapping most of the original concepts anyway. The sound that escaped Madeline's throat was somewhere between a laugh and a growl. She looked from David to Richard, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Uncle and nephew, the old boys, club in action. Her talent was useful to them. Her gender and lack of family connections were not. You're going to scrap my concepts. She stepped closer to David, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to smell his expensive cologne. The community integration plan that took me 6 months to develop. The sustainable building practices that could revolutionize downtown Austin. The affordable housing component that actually addresses gentrification instead of ignoring it. David's smile faltered slightly. Like I said, clients change their minds. The client loved every single element of my plan. I was there for every presentation, every revision, every late-night phone call. Madeline's voice rose. 8 years of swallowed frustrations finally finding their voice. You weren't even in the room for half the meetings. Madeline, Richard's tone was sharp. That's enough. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. You know what, Richard? You're right. It is enough. 8 years of watching mediocre men take credit for exceptional work is enough. 8 years of being told I'm valuable while being passed over for every major opportunity is enough. She turned to David, who was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. And you, David, are about to learn exactly how valuable I actually was. Good luck explaining sustainable urban drainage systems to the Morrison Group. I'm sure your MBA from Daddy's alma mater covered that extensively. Now wait just a minute, David started. No, you wait. Madeline grabbed her purse from the chair, her movements sharp and deliberate. Wait for the client calls when they realize their visionary new project lead can't tell the difference between mixed-use development and mixed drinks. She headed for the door, then paused, her hand on the handle. Oh, and David, that innovative green roof system you'll probably want to take credit for. It requires a structural engineering background you don't have. But I'm sure Uncle Richard will find someone else to do the actual work while you schmooze the client. The conference room was dead silent as Madeline walked out, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floors of the open office. Conversations stopped, keyboards went quiet, and 30 pairs of eyes followed her progress toward the elevator bank. Maya Restrepo, her best friend and the firm's lead interior designer, intercepted her halfway across the office. Maddie, what happened? You look like you're about to commit murder. Morrison Project. David, need I say more? Madeline punched the elevator call button with more force than necessary. Maya's dark eyes flashed with understanding and anger. They gave it to the golden boy. Not only gave it to him, but he had the audacity to call my 18 months of work preliminary and suggested they'll probably scrap most of my concepts. The elevator dinged, and Madeline stepped inside, Maya close behind. That pretentious little... Maya caught herself as other employees filed into the elevator. She waited until they were alone in the lobby before continuing. What are you going to do? Madeline pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the bustling sidewalk. Downtown Austin thrummed around them, food trucks, live music, the eclectic mix of tech workers and artists that made the city unique. It was the kind of urban energy she'd spent her career trying to capture and enhance in her designs. I'm going to that networking event tonight, she said. Surprising herself with the decision, Maya raised an eyebrow. Of the tech investor thing at the Four Seasons, I thought you said those events were pretentious waste-of-time circuses for people with more money than sense. They are, but I'm done waiting for opportunities to be handed to me. Madeline hailed a taxi, her mind already racing. If Henderson and Associates won't recognize talent, maybe someone else will. The taxi pulled up, and Madeline reached for the door handle. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Maya grabbed her arm. Famous last words, Maddie. Famous last words. But Madeline was already sliding into the back seat, her dark eyes fixed on something Maya couldn't see. A future that suddenly looked very different from the one she'd mapped out so carefully. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Madeline Sullivan had no idea she was about to discover that sometimes the most beautiful architecture emerges not from careful planning, but from the beautiful chaos of chance. The Four Seasons Austin rose from the shores of Ladybird Lake like a glass and steel monument to wealth and ambition. As Madeline's taxi pulled up to the valet stand, she pressed her palms against her black dress, trying to smooth away the wrinkles that had formed during her nervous fidgeting on the ride over. "That'll be $14.50, the driver said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Madeline handed him a $20, her hands steadier than she felt. "I keep the change." The hotel's lobby was a masterpiece of modern design, soaring ceilings, warm wood tones, and carefully curated art pieces that probably cost more than her annual salary. She paused near the reception desk, watching the flow of people heading toward the ballroom where the Austin Innovation and Investment Summit was being held. Tech executives in expensive casual wear mingled with venture capitalists in tailored suits. Women with perfect hair and designer handbags laughed at jokes that probably weren't funny. Everyone seemed to belong here, except her. "Excuse me, are you here for the summit?" A young woman with a tablet and a headset appeared at her elbow, her smile bright and professional. "Yes, Madeline realized she had no idea how to answer. She wasn't registered. She didn't have a ticket. She'd made this decision 3 hours ago in a fit of rage and desperation. "Her name?" The woman's fingers hovered over her tablet. "Madeline Sullivan." The lie came easier than she'd expected. "I'm with Henderson and Associates. We're sponsoring the Urban Development Panel." It wasn't entirely a lie. Henderson and Associates was listed as a minor sponsor on the event website, though Madeline was fairly certain Richard had never intended for any of his employees to actually attend. The woman scrolled through her list, her brow furrowing slightly. "So I don't see— Oh, wait, Sullivan, we have an M. Sullivan registered as a finalist for the Donovan Group assistant position, VIP seating." Madeline's heart stopped. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're one of the final candidates for the executive assistant position with Corbin Donovan, right? There was some confusion about the name. We had you down as Matthew Sullivan initially, but HR clarified it was M for Madeline." The woman beamed. "Mr. Donovan is conducting final interviews tonight. Very exclusive opportunity." Every instinct Madeline had developed over 31 years of life screamed at her to correct the mistake. To explain that she was an urban planner, not a candidate for an assistant position, and certainly not someone who belonged in VIP seating at an event like this. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Right, the interview, of course. Wonderful. Here's your VIP badge and program. Mr. Donovan will meet with the final 3 candidates in the Prickly Pear Suite starting at 8:30. You're scheduled for 9:15. The woman handed her a silver badge with VIP Donovan Group, emblazoned across it in elegant script. Madeline clipped the badge to her dress, her mind reeling. Corbin Donovan. She'd heard the name, of course. Tech billionaire, something to do with augmented reality and urban planning applications. The kind of visionary who was reshaping how cities functioned and grew. "Thank you," she managed, then followed the flow of people toward the ballroom. The ballroom was even more impressive than the lobby. Crystal chandeliers, panoramic views of the lake, and networking stations scattered throughout the space. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and positioned herself near one of the information displays, trying to blend in while she gathered her bearings. "And quite a turnout, isn't it?" Madeline turned to find an older woman beside her, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older wisdom. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob and eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, it's impressive," Madeline replied, grateful for a normal human interaction. "First time at one of these events." The woman's smile was knowing. "You have that deer-in-headlights look that newcomers get." "I'm Eleanor Whitfield, by the way. I run a consulting firm that specializes in connecting investors with innovative urban development projects." Madeline Sullivan. I'm in urban planning. The truth felt strange after the lies she'd just told. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Ah, a kindred spirit. What kind of projects do you work on? For the first time since walking into the hotel, Madeline felt herself relax. Mixed-use developments, sustainable housing, community integration. I'm particularly interested in how technology can enhance urban livability without displacing existing communities. Fascinating. That's exactly the kind of thinking Corbin Donovan is looking for in his new campus project. Are you familiar with his work? Madeline's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Are not as familiar as I should be, I'm afraid. Eleanor gestured toward the stage, where a presentation was beginning. He's speaking in 20 minutes. You should listen. His vision for the intersection of technology and urban development is revolutionary. He's also, she lowered her voice conspiratorially, notoriously difficult to work with. Brilliant, but demanding. Goes through assistants like most people go through coffee filters. A chill ran down Madeline's spine. The assistant position, the interview. In less than 2 hours, she was supposed to sit across from one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs in the country and pretend to be someone she wasn't. Eleanor, she said carefully, what exactly does Corbin Donovan look for in an assistant? Someone who can keep up with his mind, for starters. He operates on pure instinct and expects everyone around him to anticipate his needs. He values intelligence over experience, adaptability over procedure. Eleanor studied Madeline's face. Why? Thinking of applying. Something like that. The lights dimmed, and a voice over the sound system announced the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Donovan Group, Corbin Donovan. The man who walked onto the stage commanded attention without trying. Tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and steel-grey eyes that seemed to scan the entire room in the space of a heartbeat. He wore dark jeans, a charcoal blazer, and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, casual elegance that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the ballroom without the aid of a microphone. 5 years ago, I stood in front of a city planning commission in San Francisco and watched them approve a development that would displace 300 families to build luxury condos that would sit empty as investment properties. The room had gone completely silent. This wasn't the typical tech entrepreneur pitch they'd been expecting. And I realized that night that technology wasn't just changing how we work and communicate. It was changing how we live, where we live, and who gets to live there. The question wasn't whether tech companies had a responsibility to the communities they entered, but whether we had the courage to reimagine what urban development could be. Madeline found herself leaning forward, hanging on every word. This was her passion, her life's work, being articulated by someone with the resources to actually make it happen. The Donovan Group's new Austin campus won't just be another tech headquarters. It will be a living laboratory for sustainable urban integration, affordable housing, community spaces, local business incubation, and technology that enhances rather than replaces human connection. The applause was thunderous, but Madeline barely heard it. Her mind was racing, connecting dots, seeing possibilities. This was the kind of project she'd dreamed of her entire career, the kind of work that could actually change lives instead of just generating profit. As Corbin Donovan left the stage, Eleanor touched her arm, still thinking about that assistant position. Madeline watched him disappear through a side door, surrounded by a small entourage of executives and advisors. In 90 minutes, she was supposed to walk into a room and convince this man to hire her for a job she didn't want to do, work she'd never dreamed she could be part of. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I think I am. Because sometimes the biggest risks led to the most extraordinary destinations. And sometimes you had to pretend to be someone else before you could figure out who you really were. At 9:10, Madeline stood outside the Prickly Pear suite, her hand raised to knock on the heavy wooden door. Through the frosted glass, she could see shadows moving, figures in conversation, the occasional gesture. Her heart hammered against her ribs with a rhythm that felt like a warning. You don't belong here. Turn around, walk away, go home to your safe, predictable life. But her safe, predictable life had just handed her most important project to a mediocre man with good connections. Her safe, predictable life was a dead end disguised as a career path. She knocked. "Come in." The voice from the presentation, confident, commanding, with just a hint of Texas drawl that suggested roots deeper than his polished exterior revealed. Madeline turned the handle and stepped into the suite. The room was elegant but warm, with rich leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the lake. 3 people sat around a low coffee table, Corbin Donovan in the center, flanked by a woman with sharp cheekbones and steel-rimmed glasses, and a man whose expensive suit couldn't quite disguise his nervous energy. Corbin looked up as she entered, and Madeline felt the full force of those grey eyes. They were the color of storm clouds, intelligent and intense, and they seemed to catalogue everything about her in the space of a heartbeat, her dress, her posture, the way she held herself. "Miss Sullivan," he said, rising from his chair. Up close, he was even more imposing than he'd appeared on stage. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his eyes, with the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. "I'm Corbin Donovan. This is Sarah Chen, my current assistant, and Marcus Webb, head of HR." Sarah Chen looked like she could run a small country before lunch and still have energy left for a hostile takeover. Marcus Webb looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Please sit." Corbin gestured to the chair across from them. Madeline settled into the leather chair, acutely aware that her entire future, whatever that looked like now, might be determined by the next 30 minutes. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Your resume is interesting," Sarah said, consulting a tablet. "Top of your class at UT Austin, Masters in Urban Planning, 8 years at Henderson and Associates. Tell me, what made you decide to transition from urban planning to executive assistance?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Madeline could feel 3 pairs of eyes studying her, waiting for her answer. This was it, the moment where she either committed to the lie or came clean and walked away. She thought about David Henderson's smug smile, about 18 months of work being dismissed as preliminary, about a future that stretched ahead of her like a highway to nowhere. "Honestly," she said, meeting Sarah's gaze directly, "because I'm tired of designing the future for other people while watching less qualified individuals get to build it." Corbin's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't the answer he'd been expecting. "Urban planning is my passion," Madeline continued, her voice growing stronger. "But passion without power is just elaborate daydreaming. I've spent 8 years creating visions that other people get to implement, solutions that other people get credit for. I want to be in the room where decisions are made, not outside hoping someone remembers to invite me." "That's a rather mercenary way of looking at career advancement," Marcus observed, making a note on his tablet. "Is it, or is it realistic?" Madeline turned to him. "How many brilliant ideas die in middle management because the people who have them don't have access to the people who can act on them? How many innovations never see daylight because there's no bridge between vision and execution?" "And you see the assistant role as that bridge?" Corbin asked. His voice was neutral, but something in his eyes suggested genuine curiosity. "I see it as an opportunity to understand how visionary leaders think how they make decisions, how they turn impossible ideas into reality. Madeline looked directly at him. Your presentation tonight, that vision of technology enhancing community rather than replacing it, that's the kind of thinking that could revolutionize urban development. But vision without implementation is just beautiful theory. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a glance that Madeline couldn't read. Corbin leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. What did you think of the campus project? He asked. This was dangerous territory. Madeline knew she should give a safe, generic answer, something about innovation and community partnership. Instead, she heard herself saying, I think it's the most ambitious urban integration project I've ever heard proposed, and I think you're underestimating the political resistance you're going to face. The room went very quiet. Go on, Corbin said. You're essentially asking Austin to trust a tech billionaire to do the right thing for their community. Given the track record of big tech in cities like San Francisco and Seattle, that's a hard sell. The affordable housing component is brilliant, but if you don't get community buy-in from the start, you'll spend 2 years fighting zoning battles and community opposition. And how would you suggest we address that? His tone was challenging now, but not dismissive. Madeline's mind raced. This was her wheelhouse, the intersection of vision and implementation that she'd spent her career navigating. Community-driven design charrettes. Bring residents into the planning process from day one. Don't just ask them what they want. Show them how to design it themselves. Make them co-creators, not beneficiaries. She could see she had their attention now. Most developers do community outreach as a checkbox exercise. You need to make it the foundation of your design process. Partner with local non-profits, community colleges, neighborhood associations. Build trust before you build anything else. That sounds like it would add significant time and complexity to the project, Marcus pointed out. It would add 6 months to planning and save you 2 years of litigation and community hostility, Madeline replied. Plus, you'd end up with a better project. Communities know their own needs better than any outside expert ever could. Corbin was studying her now with an intensity that made her skin feel warm. You've thought about this quite a bit for someone who's interested in being an assistant. The comment was a test, and they both knew it. Madeline met his gaze steadily. I've thought about it because it's the kind of project I've been dreaming of my entire career. Urban development that actually serves the people who live there. Technology that enhances community instead of displacing it. That's not just a job for me, it's a calling. And you think the best way to pursue that calling is to organize my calendar and manage my correspondence? Sarah's tone was skeptical. I think the best way to pursue it is to learn from someone who has the vision and the resources to make it happen. Madeline turned back to Corbin. You're not just building a campus, you're prototyping the future of urban development. I want to understand how that happens from the inside. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Madeline could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Finally, Corbin spoke. My last 3 assistants quit because they couldn't handle the unpredictability. I work odd hours, change directions without warning, and I expect people around me to anticipate problems I haven't even thought of yet. I'm demanding, impatient, and I don't suffer fools. I wouldn't expect anything less from someone trying to change the world, Madeline replied. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Sarah, Marcus, could you give us a moment? They exchanged another glance, then gathered their materials and left the room. Suddenly, the suite felt much smaller, the air between them charged with an energy Madeline couldn't quite name. Corbin stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. Tell me something, Miss Sullivan. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken? The question caught her off guard. Professional or personal? Whichever matters more. Madeline thought about it, about all the safe choices, the careful plans, the bridges she'd never burned and opportunities she'd never seized. Honestly, probably walking into this room tonight. He turned to face her, and she saw something like approval in his expression. Why? Because I have no idea what I'm doing, because I'm completely out of my depth, because everything about this is the opposite of how I usually make decisions. She paused. And because I'm tired of playing it safe while life happens to other people. Corbin returned to his chair, but instead of sitting, he remained standing, looking down at her. The job pays $200,000 a year, plus benefits. Standard non-disclosure agreement. You'd start Monday. Madeline's breath caught. $200,000 was more than double her current salary. It was financial freedom, creative opportunity, and professional suicide all rolled into one impossible offer. Are you offering me the position? I'm offering you a chance to prove you can handle it. 3 months, with performance reviews every month. If you can keep up, we'll talk about making it permanent. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to ask for time to think about it, to negotiate, to ask 1,000 questions about job responsibilities and expectations. Instead, she stood and extended her hand. I accept. His handshake was firm, confident, and sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. Welcome to the chaos, Miss Sullivan. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. As his fingers released hers, Madeline realized she had absolutely no idea what she'd just committed to, but for the first time in years, that felt like exactly the right place to be. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Madeline stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., trying to tame her dark hair into something that looked professionally appropriate, while her reflection stared back with undisguised panic. You can do this, she whispered to herself. Then immediately felt foolish for needing the pep talk. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Chen. Meeting at 7 a.m. Donovan Group offices, 47th floor. Ask for me at reception. Dress code, whatever you can run in. Madeline stared at the message. Whatever you can run in. What kind of office job required running? By 6:45, she was standing in the lobby of the Frost Bank Tower, Austin's most recognizable skyscraper. The building rose 33 stories above the city, its distinctive LED crown a beacon visible for miles. But according to her text, the Donovan Group occupied floors 46 through 50 of an adjacent tower connected by sky bridge. The elevator to the 47th floor felt like a rocket ship, her ears popping as she ascended. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that looked nothing like any office she'd ever seen. The reception area was all exposed brick, polished concrete, and living walls of green plants. Instead of traditional office furniture, there were modular seating areas, standing desks at various heights, and what appeared to be a coffee bar that could have been transplanted from the hippest cafe in East Austin. You must be Madeline. A young man with purple hair and paint-splattered jeans approached her. I'm Jake, one of the developers. Sarah's waiting for you in the war room. He led her through an open workspace where employees worked at desks made from reclaimed wood, some standing, some sitting on exercise balls, one woman typing while walking slowly on a treadmill desk. The energy was palpable, conversations flowing, whiteboards covered in diagrams and equations, the hum of creativity in motion. War room, Madeline asked as they passed a glass-walled conference room where a man was presenting something to a group while drawing on the walls with marker. Sarah's nickname for the operations center. Fair warning, she's been here since 5 a.m. and she's had a lot of coffee. They arrived at a space that looked like mission control for a space launch. Multiple monitors lined the walls, displaying everything from project timelines to stock prices, to what appeared to be live feeds from construction sites around the world. Sarah Chen stood in the center of it all, wearing jeans, boots, and a blazer, talking rapidly into a Bluetooth headset while simultaneously typing on a tablet. "Yes, I understand the permit office doesn't open until 8, but this is Austin, not Zurich. Someone there owes someone else a favor, and I need that favor called in now." She paused, listening, because Corbin lands in 40 minutes, and if he finds out the concrete pour is delayed because of paperwork, someone's going to have a very bad day. She ended the call and turned to Madeline. "Right on time? Good. Coffee?" "Please." Sarah poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine into a mug emblazoned with Chaos Coordinator and handed it to Madeline. A first lesson: Corbin operates on 3 speeds: fast, faster, and barely controlled frenzy. Your job is to stay ahead of the frenzy. Madeline took a sip of coffee and nearly gasped. It was the best coffee she'd ever tasted. Where is he now? Flying back from a meeting in Seattle. He was supposed to spend 2 days there, but he got bored and left early. Which means his schedule for today is completely shot, and everything we planned for Wednesday is now happening in about an hour. One of the monitors chimed, and Sarah glanced at it. And that's his car leaving the airport, which gives us 37 minutes to brief you on today's agenda. For the next half hour, Sarah led Madeline through a crash course in Corbin Donovan's world. The man apparently ran on a mixture of intuition, caffeine, and pure kinetic energy. His schedule was less a plan than a suggestion, subject to change based on inspiration, crisis, or the simple fact that he'd gotten bored with whatever he was supposed to be doing. He has a standing meeting with the City Planning Commission at 10, lunch with potential investors at noon, and a site visit to the proposed campus location at 3 Eyes, Sarah explained, pulling up calendars on multiple screens. But he also has a habit of deciding he needs to personally inspect every aspect of any project that's not going perfectly. And the thing about running? Sarah smiled grimly. 2 weeks ago, he decided he needed to see the foundation work at our San Antonio project. Instead of taking a car from the airport, he ran the 12 miles to the construction site because he wanted to understand the neighborhood from a pedestrian perspective. Madeline nearly choked on her coffee. He ran 12 miles in a business suit. He keeps running clothes in his car and his plane and most offices we work with regularly. Sarah checked her watch. He should be here in 10 minutes. Last chance to run for your life. Before Madeline could respond, the elevator chimed, and Corbin Donovan strode into the operations center. He was wearing dark jeans, a white t-shirt, and a leather jacket that looked expensive and well-worn. His hair was slightly mussed from travel, and he carried a messenger bag slung across his chest. "Sarah, please tell me the permit situation is handled," he said without preamble. Handled. The concrete pour starts at 9:30. Excellent. And the city planning meeting? Moved to 10:30 to accommodate Commissioner Rodriguez's schedule change. Perfect. His grey eyes landed on Madeline, and she felt that same jolt of electricity she'd experienced during the interview. "Ms. Sullivan, ready for your first day?" "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, then immediately worried that sounded too casual. But Corbin smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Honesty. "I like that. Sarah, is she up to speed?" "As much as anyone can be in 37 minutes. "Good. Madeline, you're with me for the city planning meeting. I want your perspective on the political dynamics." He turned to Sarah. "How long before you can transition out?" 2 weeks if everything goes smoothly. 4 weeks if you insist on personally redesigning the universe between now and then. Fair enough? Corbin checked his watch. "Madeline, we need to talk strategy for the Planning Commission. Walk with me." He headed for the elevator, and Madeline hurried to keep up, her coffee mug still in hand. As the elevator doors closed, she realized she was alone with her new boss for the first time since the interview. "So," Corbin said, leaning against the elevator wall. Nervous, terrified, she admitted. Good, comfort is the enemy of growth. The elevator started its descent toward the parking garage. Tell me, what do you think the Planning Commission's biggest concern is going to be about our project? Madeline considered the question. Political cover. They want to support innovation and economic development, but they can't be seen as prioritizing corporate interests over community needs. They need a narrative that makes them look like champions of the people. And how do we give them that narrative? We make the community the hero of the story, not Donovan Group. The answer came to her as she spoke it. Frame the project as responding to community input rather than imposing a corporate vision. Present the affordable housing and community spaces as the primary features, with the tech campus as the supporting element that makes it financially viable. Corbin studied her as the elevator descended. That's a complete inversion of how most developers approach these presentations. Most developers aren't trying to revolutionize urban development. They're trying to maximize profit while minimizing political resistance. The elevator doors opened to reveal a parking garage filled with expensive cars. But if you want to change how cities develop, you have to change how the conversation happens. Corbin led her to a Tesla Model S, the color of storm clouds. Interesting theory. Let's see if it works. As they drove through downtown Austin toward City Hall, Madeline found herself watching Corbin navigate both traffic and phone calls with equal intensity. He was simultaneously discussing construction schedules with someone in Portland, texting responses to what appeared to be urgent questions about a project in Denver, and asking her detailed questions about Austin's political landscape. "You multitask like this regularly?" she asked during a brief pause in the chaos. "Time is the only resource you can't manufacture more of," he replied, taking a call about supply chain issues. "The question isn't whether you can do multiple things at once, it's whether you can do them all well." Watching him work, Madeline began to understand why he went through assistance so quickly. The man operated at a frequency that most people couldn't sustain. But there was something exhilarating about it too, the sense that every moment mattered, that big things were happening, and she was part of making them happen. As they pulled into the parking garage beneath City Hall, Corbin ended his call and turned to her. "Ready to see if your theory holds up under fire?" Madeline straightened her blazer and checked her reflection in the car's mirror. Let's find out." But as they walked toward the building entrance, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into a world where one wrong answer could expose her as the fraud she felt like. The architecture of chance she was learning was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The Austin City Planning Commission met in a sterile conference room that felt designed to drain the life out of any innovative idea unfortunate enough to be presented there. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unflattering light. Around a horseshoe-shaped table sat 7 commissioners, each with a stack of papers, a cup of coffee, and the weary expression of people who'd heard too many promises from developers who saw the city as a profit opportunity. Madeline sat behind Corbin, trying to look like she belonged there while her heart hammered against her ribs. In the 30 minutes since they'd arrived, she'd watched 3 other presentations: a strip mall renovation, a luxury condo complex, and a mixed-use development that sounded impressive until you realized it would displace an entire low-income neighborhood. Each presentation followed the same pattern. Developer promises jobs and tax revenue. Commissioners ask pointed questions about community impact. Developer gives vague assurances about working with stakeholders. Commissioners approve with reluctant resignation. "Next item," announced Commission Chair Patricia Hernandez, a woman whose steel-grey hair and sharper eyes suggested she'd heard every possible variation of developer bullshit. Donovan Group Campus Proposal. Mr. Donovan, you have 20 minutes. Corbyn stood, but instead of moving to the presentation podium, he remained beside the table. Commissioners, I want to start by acknowledging that you've probably heard variations of this conversation a dozen times this week. Tech company wants to build something big, promises jobs and economic development, asks you to trust them to do right by the community. A few commissioners exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual opening. The difference is that I'm not here to ask for your trust. Trust has to be earned, and the tech industry's track record in cities like San Francisco and Seattle doesn't inspire confidence. Corbyn gestured to the presentation screen, which remained blank. Instead, I want to talk about what Austin's East Side community has told us they actually need. Commissioner Maria Santos leaned forward. You've been talking to community members? For 6 months. Not about our project, about their neighborhood, what works, what doesn't, what they hope for their kids, what keeps them up at night. Corbyn pressed a button on his tablet, and the screen filled with photos. Not architectural renderings, but images of people, families, community gardens, local businesses, children playing in inadequate parks. These conversations taught us that East Austin doesn't need another development that promises to revitalize the community by pricing out the people who built it. They need affordable housing that's actually affordable, community spaces that serve families, and economic opportunities that don't require a computer science degree. Madeline watched the commissioners' faces, seeing skepticism begin to shift into interest. This was the narrative flip she'd suggested in the car, making the community the hero instead of the corporation. So we redesigned the entire project, Corbyn continued. 60% affordable housing, 40% market rate, community center with childcare, health clinic, and small business incubators, local hiring requirements and apprenticeship programs. The tech campus becomes the economic engine that makes everything else possible, not the primary purpose. Commissioner Rodriguez raised his hand. Mr. Donovan, this sounds admirable, but the economics don't make sense. How do you generate sufficient return on investment with those ratios? We don't, Corbyn said simply. Not in the traditional sense. Donovan Group will break even on the project over 15 years instead of turning a profit in 5. But we'll create a model for sustainable urban development that can be replicated in other cities. The room went quiet. Commissioner Hernandez frowned. Mr. Donovan, you're asking us to believe that a for-profit corporation is willing to sacrifice returns for community benefit. This was the moment. Madeleine could see it in the commissioners' faces, the question that would make or break the entire proposal. They'd heard too many promises that sounded good in presentation rooms and turned into gentrification nightmares in reality. Corbyn looked at Madeleine, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. Commissioner Hernandez, you're absolutely right to be skeptical, he said. So let me propose something that puts our money behind our words. Donovan Group will establish a community oversight board with veto power over any changes to the affordable housing component. We'll fund it for 20 years, and board members will be elected by East Side residents, not appointed by us. The commissioners began murmuring among themselves. This was unheard of, a developer voluntarily surrendering control over their own project. Furthermore, Corbyn continued, we'll establish a community land trust that ensures the affordable housing remains affordable in perpetuity, not 5 years, not 10 years, forever. Commissioner Santos was taking notes rapidly. And if the project fails financially, then Donovan Group absorbs the loss, and the community assets transfer to the city at no cost. Madeleine felt something shift in the room's energy. The commissioners weren't just listening anymore, they were engaged, asking detailed questions about implementation, timelines, and legal structures. For the first time all morning, they sounded like people who wanted to say yes. "Mr. Donovan," Commissioner Hernandez said finally, "this is either the most progressive development proposal we've ever seen, or the most elaborate marketing scheme. How do we tell the difference?" Corbin was quiet for a moment, and Madeline could see him weighing his response. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Because I grew up in a neighborhood like East Austin, in Dallas, before the tech boom, when developers came in and promised revitalization and delivered displacement." His gray eyes moved around the table, meeting each commissioner's gaze. "My family lost our house when I was 12. Not to foreclosure, but to gentrification. Property taxes tripled in 2 years because of improvements that priced out everyone who'd built the community. The personal revelation hung in the air like a challenge. I spent my career building technology that was supposed to make life better, only to watch it make housing unaffordable and communities unrecognizable. This project is my chance to prove that innovation and inclusion aren't mutually exclusive." When the commissioners voted 40 minutes later, it was unanimous approval with one condition: a 6-month community input period before final design approval. As they walked out of City Hall, Madeline realized she was shaking slightly from adrenaline. "That was incredible," she said as they reached the car. "I've never seen a presentation turn a room around like that." Corbin was quiet as he started the engine. "It wasn't a presentation, Madeline. It was the truth." "The story about your family, was that planned?" "No, that was improvisation." He glanced at her as they pulled into traffic. "Something I learned from watching you suggest we flip the narrative. Sometimes the most powerful strategy is just being honest about what you're actually trying to accomplish." As they drove back toward downtown, Madeline felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The sense that her work could actually matter. That she wasn't just designing buildings, but helping to shape how people lived. "So what's next?" she asked. Corbin smiled, and there was something almost dangerous in the expression. "Done next. We prove we can actually deliver on every promise we just made, which means you're about to get a very intensive education in the difference between vision and execution." Madeline looked out at the Austin skyline, thinking about community oversight boards and affordable housing trusts, about turning idealistic promises into concrete reality. She'd walked into that meeting as an urban planner pretending to be an assistant. But somewhere in the last 2 hours, the lines had started to blur. Maybe the architecture of chance wasn't about choosing between who you were and who you could become. Maybe it was about discovering that the two were never as different as you thought. 3 days into her new life, Madeline Sullivan was beginning to understand why Corbin Donovan went through assistance like tissue paper. It wasn't just the pace, though keeping up with someone who treated sleep as an optional suggestion and treated his smartphone like a vital organ was exhausting. It was the constant state of controlled chaos that surrounded everything he touched. "Madeline, I need you to call the contractor in Portland and find out why the sustainable concrete isn't sustainable anymore," Corbin said, not looking up from the 3 monitors arranged on his standing desk. "Then get me 15 minutes with the mayor's chief of staff about the zoning variance and see if you can track down whoever decided that our community meeting needs city council approval." It was 7:30 a.m., and they were in his office on the 50th floor, a space that looked more like a high-end architect's studio than a corporate executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Austin stretching to the horizon. The furniture was minimal and expensive, but the walls were covered with whiteboards, project timelines, and architectural sketches that looked like they'd been drawn by someone who thought in 3 dimensions. "The sustainable concrete issue is about the supplier, not the formula," Madeline said, pulling up her notes on her tablet. Their certification lapsed, but there are 2 other certified suppliers in the region. I have calls in to both. Corbin finally looked up, and she caught a flicker of surprise in his grey eyes. You already called them. I read the supplier contract yesterday after the Portland team flagged the issue. The certification requirement is standard, so I figured it was a logistics problem, not a materials problem. And the mayor's office. Chief of Staff can see you at 2:15, but only for 10 minutes. He's squeezing you in between budget meetings. Madeline hesitated. And the community meeting approval requirement is actually good news. Corbin raised an eyebrow. How is more bureaucracy good news? Because it means the city is taking our community engagement seriously. If they're requiring formal approval, it suggests they see this as a precedent-setting process, not just a box-checking exercise. For a moment, the office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of Austin traffic 49 floors below. Corbin was studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You've been here 3 days, he said finally. And most assistants spend 3 weeks trying to figure out how to manage my calendar without having a nervous breakdown. Most assistants probably don't have 8 years of experience navigating municipal bureaucracy and contractor politics, Madeline replied. Though I'm not entirely sure I won't have a nervous breakdown. The jury's still out. Corbin laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face entirely. Honesty. Still refreshing. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. Seattle team wants a video call in 10 minutes. Denver has a crisis with the foundation permits, and I just got an email from my father asking why the Wall Street Journal thinks I'm going soft on profit margins. Your father reads the Wall Street Journal's opinion on your business decisions. My father taught me everything I know about business and innovation. He also thinks community engagement is a waste of time that interferes with efficiency. Corbin's expression darkened slightly. He's been questioning my judgment since the Planning Commission meeting. This was new territory. In the 3 days she'd been working for him, Corbin had mentioned dozens of colleagues, contractors, and city officials, but never his family. Madeline sensed she was stepping into something more personal than professional. Oh, what does he think you should be doing instead? Building the campus, maximizing square footage, minimizing community obligations, traditional development with a tech twist. Corbin was gathering papers for the Seattle call, but his movements were sharper than usual. He's not wrong from a pure business perspective. We could probably double our return on investment with a more conventional approach. But I've seen what conventional approaches do to communities, and I've seen what happens to companies that prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability. He paused, looking out at the city below. Sometimes the most innovative thing you can do is prove that there's a better way to do business. The Seattle call, it turned out, was about a labor dispute that threatened to delay their Pacific Northwest project by 6 months. Madeline watched Corbin navigate the conversation with a combination of technical expertise, political awareness, and genuine concern for the workers whose livelihoods were at stake. He wasn't just managing a business problem, he was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone involved. What if we brought in a mediator? She found herself suggesting during a pause in the discussion. Someone from the community who has credibility with both the union and the city. The faces on the video screen turned toward her with curiosity. Corbin gestured for her to continue. Labor disputes usually aren't really about money or schedules. They're about respect and power dynamics. If you can find someone who both sides trust to facilitate the conversation, you might discover that the actual gap between positions is smaller than it appears. That's actually brilliant, said Jennifer Walsh, the Seattle project manager. There's a local pastor who's been involved in community development for 20 years. Both sides respect him. After they ended the call, Corbin was quiet for a long moment. Where did that come from? Urban planning is basically professional conflict resolution, Madeline said. You're constantly trying to balance competing interests, residents, businesses, developers, city officials. Everyone wants something different, and your job is to find the design that gives everyone enough of what they need. Is that how you see what we're doing here? Professional conflict resolution. The question felt loaded with significance, though Madeline wasn't sure why. I see it as trying to prove that innovation and community aren't mutually exclusive, that you can build something profitable and transformative without destroying what came before. Corbin's phone rang, the Denver crisis, demanding immediate attention. But as he answered the call, he caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Madeline found herself smiling as she turned back to her own work. For the first time since she'd walked into that networking event, she felt like she wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was discovering who she actually was when given the chance to operate at full capacity. The morning flew by in a blur of phone calls, problem-solving, and the kind of high-stakes decision-making that made every moment feel consequential. By lunchtime, they'd resolved the Seattle mediation, found a workaround for the Denver permits, and scheduled a conference call with 3 mayors who wanted to discuss replicating their Austin model in their cities. "I need food," Corbin announced at 12:30, saving his work and closing his laptop. "Real food, not whatever's in the break room vending machine. You hungry?" "Starving," Madeline admitted. "Good, I know a place." The place turned out to be a food truck called Guerrilla Tacos, parked in a lot behind a gas station on East 6th Street. It wasn't what Madeline had expected from a billionaire's lunch plans, but the line of customers stretching 20 deep suggested the food was worth the wait. "Best fish tacos in Austin," Corbin said as they joined the queue. The chef used to work at a 5-star restaurant in Los Angeles, but he got tired of cooking for people who cared more about being seen than about the food. "How do you know that?" "I offered to invest in expanding his operation. He turned me down." Corbin grinned. "Said venture capital would ruin what made the food special." "I respect that." As they waited in line, Madeline found herself seeing a different side of Corbin Donovan. He knew the food truck owner by name, asked about his daughter's college applications, and insisted on paying for the order of the elderly woman in front of them who was counting change from her purse. "You do this often?" Madeline asked as they found a picnic table in the shade of a massive oak tree. "Define this. Hide from your billion-dollar company to eat tacos behind a gas station." Corbin took a bite of his fish taco and closed his eyes briefly in appreciation. "This isn't hiding. This is remembering why any of the rest of it matters. Because of the tacos. Because of the community. Miguel, the chef, he's building something real here. People come for the food, but they stay for the conversation. Kids do homework at these tables after school. Local musicians play here on Friday nights. It's organic, authentic, completely unplanned." He gestured around the lot, which Madeline now noticed was indeed functioning as an impromptu community center. "This is what we're trying to create with the campus project, just at a larger scale. Authentic community that happens naturally versus engineered community that looks good in marketing materials." Exactly. The difference between designing spaces where people want to gather versus designing spaces where you think they should gather. Madeline studied his face as he talked. When he spoke about the work, about community and innovation, and finding better ways to build, his entire demeanor changed. The sharp-edged intensity softened into something more thoughtful, more passionate. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Shoot." "Why me?" "For the assistant position, I mean. You could have hired someone with actual experience in executive support, someone who knew your industry, someone who wouldn't need 3 weeks to figure out your filing system." Corbin was quiet for a moment, watching a group of teenagers at another table working on what looked like calculus homework while sharing an order of queso. "Because everyone else was trying to give me the answers they thought I wanted to hear," he said finally. "You were the only one who told me I was underestimating the political resistance, the only one who suggested making the community the hero of the story instead of the corporation. That's not executive assistant thinking. That's urban planning thinking. Maybe that's what I needed, someone who understood that building things isn't just about engineering and economics. It's about people and politics and power dynamics." He met her eyes across the small table. "And maybe I needed someone who could see the bigger picture instead of just managing the details." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications that Madeline wasn't ready to examine too closely. This felt dangerously close to territory she'd been trying to avoid, the growing awareness that working with Corbin Donovan was becoming about much more than just the work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How's life as a corporate sellout? Still planning to quit after you make enough money to start your own firm?" Madeline stared at the message, realizing she hadn't thought about her exit strategy in days. When she'd taken this job, it had been with the vague plan of learning from the inside before returning to urban planning. But sitting here, talking about authentic community and innovative development with someone who shared her vision for what cities could become, the idea of leaving felt increasingly absurd. "Everything okay?" Corbin asked, noticing her expression. "Just my best friend checking in. She thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you?" Madeline looked around the lot, at Miguel's food truck, at the teenagers doing homework, at the impromptu community that had grown up around really good tacos and a few picnic tables. She thought about the morning's work, about finding solutions to problems that mattered, about being part of something that could actually change how cities developed. "Yeah," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I think maybe I have." But as Corbin smiled in response, Madeline realized that losing her mind might be the most sensible thing she'd done in years. "You look different." Madeline looked up from her laptop to find Maya standing in the doorway of her apartment, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone conducting a scientific investigation. "Different how?" Madeline saved her work, notes from the day's meetings, preliminary research on community land trusts, and a draft proposal for the mayor's office that she'd volunteered to write despite it being well outside typical assistant duties. Happier. More energized. Maya kicked off her shoes and headed for the kitchen. "It's disturbing, frankly. I was expecting to find you stress-eating takeout and questioning all your life choices." "Why would you expect that?" "Because 3 weeks ago you were a bitter, frustrated urban planner working for a firm that treated you like expensive office furniture. Now you're working for some tech billionaire you'd never heard of, doing a job you've never done, and you look like you've discovered the secret to eternal youth." Maya emerged from the kitchen with 2 wine glasses and began opening the bottle. Madeline's apartment was small but carefully designed, an open concept space with exposed brick walls, plants everywhere, and furniture she'd collected from estate sales and refinished herself. It was the kind of place that looked effortlessly stylish but actually reflected hours of thoughtful curation. "The job is challenging," Madeline said carefully. "Challenging how? Like my boss is a demanding perfectionist, challenging, or like I think I might be falling for my boss, challenging." Madeline nearly choked on her wine. "What? No, it's not like that." "Uh-huh." Maya settled onto the couch beside her, tucking her legs beneath her. Tell me about him." "There's nothing to tell. He's brilliant, demanding, completely focused on the work." "Gorgeous." Maya, rich, obviously, single. Madeline paused a beat too long. "As far as I know." "Aha!" Maya pointed at her triumphantly. You hesitated. You've been thinking about whether he's single, which means you've been thinking about him in non-professional terms. I work for the man. Of course, I notice basic facts about his life. Basic facts like whether he's available. Madeline took a larger sip of wine than was probably wise. Can we talk about something else? We can, but you brought him up. I did not bring him up. You brought him up. I asked about your job. You immediately started talking about your boss. Maya grinned. Classic displacement behavior. You're thinking about him way more than you want to admit. Before Madeline could formulate a denial, her phone rang. Corbin's name appeared on the screen, and she felt that familiar flutter of electricity that had been happening more frequently lately. I have to take this, she said, standing and walking toward the kitchen. Corbin, it's Madeline. Hey, sorry to call so late. I know it's past 8, but I just got off a call with the Community Oversight Board candidates, and I had an idea I wanted to run by you. His voice sounded tired but excited, the way it got when he was working through a complex problem. In the background, she could hear the sounds of his office, phones ringing, conversations happening, the constant hum of activity that seemed to follow him everywhere. Bis, what kind of idea? What if we didn't just create a community oversight board for our project? What if we created a model that other developers could use, like an open-source approach to community engagement? Madeline found herself smiling despite Maya's knowing look from the couch. You want to give away your competitive advantage. I want to change how development happens everywhere, not just in Austin. If we can prove that community-driven development is more sustainable and profitable in the long term, other companies will follow, but only if we make it easy for them. Madeline paused, thinking through the implications. That's actually brilliant. You turn community engagement from a burden into a best practice. Make it harder for developers to justify not including community voices. Exactly. But I need someone who understands both the technical aspects of urban planning and the political dynamics of community engagement to help design the framework. Corbin, I'm your assistant. I organize your calendar and manage your correspondence. You're my partner in figuring out how to build better cities. The title is just paperwork. The word partner hit her like a small electric shock. From the couch, Maya was no longer pretending not to eavesdrop. She was openly staring with the fascination of someone watching a romantic comedy unfold in real time. Yes, I'd love to work on that framework. Great. I'll send you some preliminary research tonight, and we can dig into it tomorrow, maybe over dinner. There's a new place in East Austin I've been wanting to try, and I'd like to scope out the neighborhood where our project will be. Dinner. The word came out higher than she'd intended. Working dinner? Research? Community observation? There was a pause. Unless you'd prefer to keep it strictly office-based. No, dinner is fine. Dinner is research. After she hung up, Maya was grinning like she'd won the lottery. Research dinner, Maya said. In the neighborhood where his project will be. How convenient. It's work, Maya. What's he sending you to review tonight? Madeline glanced at her phone, which was already buzzing with incoming emails. Preliminary research on community engagement frameworks. And you're excited about that. It's fascinating work. The intersection of urban planning and community development with the resources to actually implement innovative solutions. Madeline trailed off, realizing she was proving Maya's point. Maddie? Maya's voice was gentler now. When's the last time you talked about work like that, with that kind of passion? Madeline thought about it. I don't know. Maybe never. And when's the last time someone asked for your opinion on something that mattered? Really asked, not just pretended to care before doing whatever they wanted anyway. Maya, I'm not saying fall in love with your boss. I'm saying maybe pay attention to the fact that you're finally in a situation where your brain and your passion are being appreciated. Maya reached over and squeezed her hand. You've been dimming yourself for so long, I'd forgotten how bright you actually are. Later that night, after Maya had left and Madeline was reviewing Corbin's research materials, her phone rang again. This time, it was Leo, her younger brother, calling from Dallas. Hey, stranger, his voice was cautious but warm. Maya called me. Said you had some big career change. Something like that. Madeline settled back on her couch, surprised by how good it was to hear from him. They'd been distant since their parents' divorce. Not angry, just awkward, like two people who'd shared a traumatic experience but never talked about it. New job? New everything, pretty much. New job, new industry, new way of thinking about what I want to do with my life. That sounds terrifying and exciting in equal measure. Pretty much. Madeline hesitated, then decided to push into territory they usually avoided. Leo, do you ever think about what would have happened if Dad hadn't left? If the family had stayed together? The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Sometimes, he said finally. But I think we would have been different people. Maybe not better people, just different. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how much energy I've spent trying to control everything, plan for every contingency, never let anyone get close enough to hurt me the way he hurt Mom. And now I'm working for someone who operates on pure instinct and changes direction without warning, and somehow it feels liberating. Like maybe the thing I thought was protecting me was actually limiting me. Sounds like more than just a job change. Madeline looked at her laptop screen, where Corbin's research materials were still open, community engagement models, case studies from cities around the world, innovative approaches to inclusive development, work that mattered, work that could change how cities grew and who got to benefit from that growth. Yeah, she said softly. I think it might be. After she hung up with Leo, Madeline sat in her quiet apartment, thinking about control and chaos, about the careful plans she'd built her life around, and the beautiful uncertainty she was beginning to embrace. Tomorrow, she would have dinner with Corbin Donovan to discuss community engagement frameworks. It was work, it was research, it was definitely not a date. But as she fell asleep that night, the last thing she thought about was the way his eyes lit up when he talked about changing the world, and the way he'd called her his partner in figuring out how to build better cities. Maybe the architecture of chance wasn't just about letting go of control. Maybe it was about learning to trust someone else enough to build something together. The restaurant Corbin had chosen sat in the heart of East Austin, in a converted warehouse that managed to feel both industrial and intimate. Exposed brick walls were softened by warm lighting and living plants, while the open kitchen allowed diners to watch chefs work their magic over wood-fired grills and massive cast-iron pans. Madeline arrived first, deliberately choosing a table near the window where she could observe the street life outside. The neighborhood was in transition, traditional Mexican markets next to artisanal coffee shops, century-old houses sharing blocks with modern condos. It was exactly the kind of area where thoughtful development could either preserve community character or destroy it entirely. Sorry I'm late, Corbin said, sliding into the seat across from her. The Seattle mediator situation required some creative problem-solving. He looked tired but energized, the way he always did after successfully navigating a complex challenge. His hair was slightly mussed from running his hands through it, and he'd loosened his tie enough to suggest the transition from business mode to something more relaxed. Good creative or expensive creative? Madeline asked. Both. We're funding a community development apprenticeship program that will train local workers for construction jobs, while giving the union guaranteed placement for their members. Corbin signaled the waiter for coffee. It costs more up front, but it creates a sustainable pipeline of skilled labor and community buy-in, and the union leadership agreed to that. They did after the mediator, Pastor Williams, pointed out that fighting over existing jobs was less productive than creating new ones. Corbin smiled. Your suggestion, by the way, the mediation approach. Madeline felt a flush of pride that she tried to hide behind her menu. Team effort. Is it? Because from where I sit, you've been contributing way above your pay grade since day one. The comment hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to address directly. Before Madeline could respond, their waiter appeared. A young man with intricate tattoos covering his arms and the kind of enthusiastic energy that suggested genuine passion for the food. First time here? He asked. A D, because if so, you have to try the wood-fired octopus with chimichurri, and the chef's been experimenting with a duck confit that's basically life-changing. Corbin looked at Madeline. Adventurous eater. Try me. Octopus, duck, and whatever vegetables you think will surprise us, Corbin told the waiter, and a bottle of whatever wine you'd drink if you were trying to impress someone. As the waiter disappeared, Madeline raised an eyebrow. Trying to impress someone. Trying to impress my partner in revolutionizing urban development, Corbin said smoothly. This is a business dinner, remember? Right, business. But there was something in his eyes that suggested they were both aware of the pretense. For the next hour, they worked through the community engagement framework while sharing plates of food that were indeed life-changing. Corbin had brought printed materials and a tablet, but their conversation ranged far beyond formal research. They talked about cities they'd loved and hated, about the difference between gentrification and genuine revitalization, about the psychology of place and the politics of belonging. The problem with most community engagement, Madeline said, gesturing with her fork, is that it happens too late in the process. Developers come in with a plan that's already 80% finalized and ask for input on paint colors and landscaping. So what's the alternative? Start with the community's vision for their own neighborhood, then design the development to support that vision instead of replacing it. Madeline pulled out her own phone and started sketching on a notes app. Look at this block, for example. She pointed out the window at the street scene in front of them. You've got Rosita's Market, which has been serving this neighborhood for 30 years. The owner lives upstairs. Her customers are mostly families within walking distance. Next door is the new coffee shop. Great coffee. But the clientele is mostly young professionals who drive here from other neighborhoods. Corbin followed her gaze. The classic early gentrification pattern. Exactly. But what if instead of seeing that as inevitable conflict, you saw it as an opportunity for intentional integration? Madeline's excitement was building as the idea developed. What if Rosita's Market expanded to include a cafe section that served both traditional Mexican pastries and artisanal coffee? What if the coffee shop offered bilingual community bulletin boards and hosted neighborhood meetings? You're talking about designing for interaction instead of segregation. I'm talking about recognizing that communities aren't static, they evolve. And the question is whether that evolution strengthens the social fabric or tears it apart. Madeline realized she'd been leaning forward, gesturing animatedly. Sorry, I get a little intense about this stuff. Don't apologize, it's... Corbin paused, studying her face. It's incredibly attractive, actually. Watching you think through complex problems, seeing how your mind connects seemingly unrelated elements into comprehensive solutions. The comment caught her completely off guard. They'd been maintaining the fiction that this was purely professional, but something in his tone suggested they'd just crossed into very different territory. Corbin, I know. This is supposed to be about work. He leaned back in his chair, but his eyes never left her face. "But I'm having trouble pretending I don't notice that you're brilliant and passionate and completely unlike anyone I've ever worked with." Madeline's heart was beating faster now, a rhythm that had nothing to do with coffee or professional excitement. "I'm your assistant. You're my partner. The title was just a technicality to get you in the door." "Was it the whole assistant thing?" Corbin was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Honestly, I don't know. When I offered you the job, I was thinking about finding someone who could keep up with the pace and help manage the chaos. But watching you work, seeing how you approach problems, how you think about community and development," he shrugged. The job description became irrelevant pretty quickly. Their waiter appeared with dessert, something involving chocolate and espresso that neither of them had ordered but looked too good to refuse. "So what does that mean?" Madeline asked. "For the job, I mean, it means I want to offer you a different position. Community Development Director. Real title, real authority, equity stake in the projects." Corbin's expression was serious now. "It means I want you to help me build something that matters as a partner, not an employee." The offer was everything she'd dreamed of professionally, the chance to lead innovative projects, to have real influence over how development happened, to be part of creating the kind of communities she'd always envisioned. It was also terrifying. "Corbin, 3 weeks ago I was a frustrated urban planner who'd never heard of you. How do you know I'm qualified for something like that? Because in 3 weeks, you've solved problems my team had been struggling with for months, because you see possibilities where other people see obstacles, because when you talk about community development, you light up like someone who's found their calling." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was electric, sending warmth up her arm and straight to her chest. "And because I trust you, which, for someone who's built his entire career on controlling every variable, is saying something." Madeline looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. The grey eyes that had seemed so intimidating during their first meeting now looked vulnerable, hopeful. "This is complicated," she said softly. "The best things usually are. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not as good as you think I am? What if we're making a mistake? Then we figure it out as we go. Together." Corbin's thumb traced across her knuckles. "I spent years trying to plan for every contingency, control every outcome, but the most important decisions I've ever made, including hiring you, have been pure instinct." Outside the restaurant, East Austin hummed with life. Families walking home from dinner, musicians setting up for evening performances, the organic community energy that made neighborhoods thrive. It was messy and unpredictable and absolutely beautiful. "Okay," Madeline said, surprising herself. "Let's see what happens when we stop planning everything and start building something together." Corbin's smile was radiant. Partners. But as he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, Madeline realized they were agreeing to much more than a professional partnership. They were stepping into territory that was completely uncharted, completely uncontrolled, and completely exhilarating. The architecture of chance, she was learning, sometimes required a leap of faith that felt like falling and flying at the same time. The Donovan Group's conference room had been transformed into what looked like a cross between a war room and an art installation. 3 walls were covered floor to ceiling with maps, photographs, demographic data, and architectural sketches. The 4th wall displayed a live feed from a community meeting happening in the East Austin neighborhood where their project would be built. This is either the most thorough community engagement process in the history of development or the most elaborate form of procrastination ever devised, Sarah Chen observed, surveying the organized chaos while balancing a cup of coffee and her ever-present tablet. Madeleine stood in the center of it all, wearing jeans and a blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had become her new uniform for the intensive community work they'd been doing for the past 2 weeks. She was surrounded by the tools of her new role: demographic studies, community surveys, architectural models, and enough sticky notes to paper a small building. "It's thorough," she replied, not looking up from the neighborhood map where she was tracking community concerns by color and category. Which is exactly what it needs to be if we want to avoid the mistakes every other developer has made in this city. Corbin emerged from behind one of the map displays, his sleeves rolled up and his tie long abandoned. He'd been in full collaboration mode for days now, the kind of intense focus that meant he forgot to eat meals and survived on coffee and pure intellectual excitement. Well, the Transportation Subcommittee raised 3 new concerns about the bus route integration, he said, consulting his notes. But I think they're actually asking for something better than what we originally proposed. Better how? Madeleine moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the coffee and paper scent that had become the conference room's permanent atmosphere. They don't just want the existing bus route to have a stop near the campus. They want a community-designed transit hub that serves multiple routes and includes bike repair, package pickup, and informal vendor space. Madeleine felt that familiar spark of excitement that came when a complex problem suddenly revealed its elegant solution. They want community infrastructure, not just convenient transportation. Exactly. Which is more expensive and more complicated, but infinitely more valuable to the neighborhood long term. She was already sketching possibilities on the whiteboard, her mind racing through the implications. A transit hub like that becomes a community gathering place, economic opportunity for local entrepreneurs, genuine infrastructure improvement rather than just accommodation for new development. Sarah watched them work with the expression of someone observing a fascinating scientific phenomenon. You two realize you've been at this for 14 hours straight, right? Normal people take breaks, eat food, sleep occasionally. Corbin and Madeleine looked at each other, suddenly aware that they'd been lost in the work for most of the day. The conference room's windows showed a dark Austin skyline, the city lights twinkling like architectural inspiration. "What time is it?" Madeleine asked. "Past 10, Sarah replied, "which means I'm going home to my husband and my cat, both of whom are more reasonable than either of you." She gathered her things, then paused at the door. "But for what it's worth, this is the best development proposal I've ever seen. The community is actually excited about it, which in my experience is basically impossible." After Sarah left, the conference room felt both more spacious and more intimate. Madeleine and Corbin were alone with their maps and models and the kind of comfortable working rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. "Hungry?" Corbin asked. "Starving. But I want to finish mapping the transit hub possibilities first. I'll order food. Thai, okay?" "Perfect." For the next hour, they worked in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional bursts of conversation when one of them discovered a new connection or solved a lingering problem. The Thai food arrived and was consumed almost unconsciously, fuel for the kind of deep work that felt more like play than professional obligation. "Madeleine," Corbin said eventually, looking up from a zoning analysis, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "What happened with your family? You've mentioned your brother a few times, but always like there's some complicated history there." Madeleine's pencil paused over the sketch she'd been working on. They'd been sharing professional confidences for weeks now, but this felt like different territory, more intimate, more revealing. My parents divorced when I was 25, she said finally. Messy, angry, financially devastating divorce that took 3 years to finalize and left everyone emotionally shredded. "I'm sorry. That's rough at any age." The worst part wasn't the divorce itself. It was discovering that my father had been hiding massive debts and risky investments for years. When everything came out, we lost the house, my mother's retirement savings, even my college fund that I thought had been safely invested. Madeline set down her pencil, her hands suddenly needing something to do. I spent 2 years helping my mother navigate bankruptcy and foreclosure while trying to finish my master's degree. Corbin was quiet, listening with the focused attention he brought to complex problems. Leo was only 22, just starting his career, and he couldn't handle the chaos. He moved to Dallas and basically disappeared from the family drama. I don't blame him, someone had to escape, but it left me as the only one managing the practical stuff. Is that why you became obsessed with planning and control? Probably. Madeline looked at the maps covering the walls, the careful organization of community input and architectural possibilities. And I learned that financial chaos could destroy everything you thought was stable, that the people you trust most could be hiding destructive secrets, that the only way to feel safe was to understand and control every variable. And now you're working with someone who thrives on improvisation and hates detailed planning. The irony isn't lost on me. She turned to face him fully. But the weird thing is, it doesn't feel chaotic when we're working together. It feels like productive uncertainty, like we're exploring possibilities instead of just avoiding catastrophe. Corbin moved closer, near enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. What's different about it? Trust, I think. When my father was making risky decisions, he was hiding them from us, protecting us from information that might have helped us prepare. But you include me in the uncertainty. You share the risk instead of shielding me from it, and that feels safe. It feels honest, like we're building something together instead of one person making decisions that affect everyone else. They were standing very close now, the architectural models and community surveys forgotten. The conference room's lighting cast everything in warm shadows, making the space feel intimate despite its professional purpose. Madeline, Corbin said softly, I need to tell you something. Okay. This partnership we've built, this working relationship, it's the best professional collaboration I've ever had. You challenge me, you improve everything we touch, you see possibilities I miss. But I'm also completely attracted to you, and pretending otherwise is becoming impossible. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse entirely. Madeline could feel her heart racing, could see the vulnerability in his expression. Corbin, I know it complicates everything. I know workplace relationships are risky, especially when there's a power dynamic involved. But I also know that what we have is extraordinary, professionally and personally. Madeline thought about all the careful boundaries she'd constructed over the years, all the safe distances she'd maintained to protect herself from exactly this kind of emotional risk. But looking at Corbin's face, seeing the honesty and hope there, those boundaries felt less like protection and more like prison walls. It does complicate everything, she said. Yes. And we don't know how this ends. No. And it could ruin the best working relationship either of us has ever had. It could. Madeline reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of end-of-day stubble under her palm. But it might also be the best thing that's ever happened to us. When he kissed her, it felt like every metaphor about architecture and foundation and building something from the ground up suddenly made perfect sense. It was careful and passionate and completely right, in a way that had nothing to do with planning and everything to do with trust. When they finally broke apart, both breathing slightly harder, Corbin rested his forehead against hers. "So what now?" he asked. Madeline looked around the conference room at their shared work, their collaborative visions spread across every surface. Then she looked back at his face, at the grey eyes that had seen her more clearly than anyone ever had. "Now we figure it out as we go," she said, "together. Because sometimes the most beautiful architecture emerged not from careful blueprints, but from the courage to build something without knowing exactly what it would become." The community presentation was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the East Austin Community Center, a converted church that still retained its soaring ceilings and stained glass windows. By 6:30, every folding chair was occupied, and people stood along the walls and in the aisles. Madeline had expected maybe 50 attendees, the kind of turnout typical for neighborhood development meetings. Instead, nearly 200 people had shown up, representing every demographic and opinion in the community. "This is either very good or very bad," she murmured to Corbin as they set up their presentation materials on the small stage. "Probably both," he replied, adjusting the microphone and surveying the crowd. "But definitely not boring." Madeline wore a navy dress and blazer that struck the right balance between professional and approachable. Corbin had chosen dark jeans and a button-down shirt, casual enough to suggest he wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. They'd spent the morning rehearsing their presentation, but looking at the packed room, she realized no amount of preparation could anticipate the energy they were about to face. "Good evening, everyone," Madeline began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Madeline Sullivan, Community Development Director for the Donovan Group, and this is Corbin Donovan." A murmur went through the crowd at Corbin's introduction. Several people held up phones to record the proceedings. In the front row, Madeline recognized Maria Santos, the city council member whose support would be crucial for final project approval. "Before we show you what we've designed," Corbin said, "we want to show you what you've told us." The first part of their presentation wasn't about architecture or economics, it was about community. Photos from neighborhood festivals, quotes from resident interviews, maps showing local businesses and gathering places. They'd spent months listening, and now they were proving they'd actually heard. "Based on your input," Madeline continued, "you've told us this neighborhood values 3 things above all: affordability, community connection, and local economic opportunity. Everything we're proposing is designed to strengthen those values, not replace them." She clicked to the next slide, architectural renderings that looked nothing like typical development presentations. Instead of gleaming towers and manicured landscapes, the images showed integrated community spaces, local businesses, and housing that complemented existing neighborhood character. "The affordable housing component isn't an afterthought," Corbin explained. "It's the foundation of the entire project. 60% of all units will be permanently affordable, managed by a community land trust that ensures they can never be converted to market rate." A woman in the third row raised her hand. "How do we know you won't change your mind when construction costs get expensive?" "Because the Community Oversight Board has veto power over any changes to the affordable housing commitment," Madeline replied. "And board members are elected by neighborhood residents, not appointed by us." The presentation continued with technical details, financial projections, and construction timelines. But the real magic happened during the question and answer period, when the room transformed from skeptical audience to engaged collaborators. "What about the transit hub?" asked an elderly man with a walker. "How do we know it'll actually serve the community and not just tech workers?" "Because you'll design it," Corbin said. "We're funding a community design process where neighborhood residents work with architects to create exactly what you need. If you want bike repair and package pickup, that's what gets built." "And if we want community gardens?" asked a young mother with 2 children. "Then we figure out how to integrate food production with transit infrastructure," Madeline replied. "The design follows your priorities, not ours." For nearly 2 hours, They fielded questions about everything from construction noise to local hiring requirements to the long-term maintenance of community spaces. Each answer revealed more depth to their planning, more genuine commitment to community partnership. But it was Maria Santos who asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Donovan, Ms. Sullivan, this all sounds wonderful in theory, but I've been in city government for 15 years, and I've heard promises like this before. What happens when your investors demand higher returns? What happens when market conditions change? How do we know this isn't just sophisticated marketing?" The room went completely quiet. This was the moment Madeline had been dreading, the question that would expose whether their community engagement was genuine or just elaborate window dressing. Corbin was quiet for a moment, and she could see him weighing his response. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Councilwoman Santos, you're right to be skeptical. The development industry has a terrible track record of making promises to communities and breaking them when profit margins get tight." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "But I want to tell you why this project is different for me personally." Madeline felt her breath catch. They hadn't discussed this. Whatever he was about to say was completely unscripted. "I grew up in a neighborhood like this one, in Dallas, before gentrification made it unrecognizable. My family lost our house when I was 12, not to foreclosure, but to property taxes that tripled in 2 years because of improvements that priced out everyone who'd built the community." The room was absolutely silent now, the kind of focused attention that suggested everyone understood they were hearing something important. "I spent my career building technology companies and making a lot of money. But I also spent it watching cities I loved become unaffordable to the people who made them special. This project is my chance to prove that development can strengthen communities instead of destroying them." He clicked to a new slide, one that wasn't in their original presentation: legal documents, financial commitments, binding agreements. "So we're not asking you to trust our good intentions. We're giving you legal guarantees. The Community Land Trust is funded for 50 years. The Oversight Board Authority is written into our corporate charter. The affordable housing commitment is backed by a bond that pays penalties if we ever violate it." Councilwoman Santos was leaning forward now, studying the documents on screen. "These are binding legal commitments, enforceable in court," Madeline confirmed. "We're betting our company's reputation and financial future on keeping these promises." The energy in the room shifted dramatically. Instead of skeptical questions, people began asking technical details about implementation. Instead of opposition, they were offering suggestions for improvement. "This is unprecedented," said an older woman who'd introduced herself as a long-time neighborhood advocate. "I've never seen developers put this much binding accountability in writing." After the formal presentation ended, people lingered for another hour, clustering around the display boards, asking detailed questions, sharing contact information. Madeleine found herself in conversations about everything from community garden management to local business incubation programs. "Ms. Sullivan," Councilwoman Santos approached as the crowd was finally beginning to thin. "And I have to ask, whose idea was it to structure the project this way, this level of community partnership and legal accountability?" Madeline glanced at Corbin, who was across the room discussing transit design with a group of cyclists. "It was collaborative. We both brought different perspectives to the problem. Because this doesn't look like typical corporate development strategy. This looks like someone who actually understands community organizing and urban planning." "I have a background in urban planning," Madeline admitted. "And Mr. Donovan convinced you to work for him as an assistant." Santos's expression was shrewd. "Interesting career trajectory. Before Madeline could respond, Corbin appeared beside them. "Guy, how do you think that went?" "I think," Santos said, "that you two have just changed the entire conversation about development in this city. Every future project is going to be measured against the standard you've set tonight." As they drove back downtown, both were quiet, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The presentation had been more than successful. It had been transformative, not just for their project, but for how community engagement could work when done with genuine commitment and legal accountability. "That was incredible," Madeline said finally. "The way people shifted from skeptical to engaged, the quality of the questions, the suggestions for improvements. The way you handled every technical question without hesitation," Corbin added. "And the way you made community organizing sound like sophisticated urban planning instead of activist troublemaking." They were stopped at a red light, the Austin skyline glittering ahead of them. In the car's intimate space, Madeline was acutely aware of how much had changed in the past few hours. They weren't just partners anymore, they were collaborators who'd just proved they could change how cities developed. "Corbin," she said softly. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we just committed to the most ambitious community development project in Austin's history. We're legally bound to keep promises that most developers would consider impossible. And somehow, sitting in that room, it felt completely achievable." Corbin reached over and took her hand. "It felt achievable because we built it together. Because we have community support and legal accountability in each other." The light turned green, but instead of driving, he pulled into a parking space along the lake. The water reflected the city lights, creating a mirror image of Austin's skyline. "Madeline, I need to tell you something else." "Okay, I'm falling in love with you, not just with working with you, not just with your intelligence and passion, but with you. The way you think, the way you care about people, the way you make everything better just by being part of it." The admission was both unexpected and completely natural, like something she'd been waiting to hear without realizing it. "That's terrifying," she said. "I know. And wonderful. I know that too." She turned to face him fully, studying the face that had become so familiar over the past weeks. "I'm falling in love with you too, which feels like the most dangerous and most necessary thing I've ever done." When he kissed her this time, it was different from the kiss in the conference room. This was deeper, more certain, the kind of kiss that acknowledged they were committing to much more than professional partnership. But as they sat together in the car, watching Austin's lights reflect on the water, Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to test everything they'd built together. The community presentation had been a triumph, but it had also made them visible in a way that felt both exciting and precarious. The architecture of chance, she was learning, sometimes revealed its most beautiful possibilities at exactly the moment when everything was about to become much more complicated. The call came at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, jarring Madeline from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. She fumbled for her phone, expecting to see Corbin's name. He had a habit of calling early when inspiration struck. Instead, the display showed Richard Henderson, her former boss, the man who'd given her best project to his nephew. The last person she wanted to hear from as she lay in her bed, still glowing from the success of last night's community presentation. "Hello." Her voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "Madeline, we need to talk. In person. Today." Richard's tone was clipped, formal, and completely unlike the paternalistic condescension she remembered. This was the voice he used when lawyers were involved. "Richard, I don't work for you anymore. If this is about the Morrison project transition, it's not about Morrison, it's about your current employment. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m., or I'll have to take this conversation public." The line went dead. Madeline stared at her phone, her mind racing through possibilities. How could her work with Donovan Group have anything to do with Henderson and Associates? They operated in completely different spheres: corporate architecture versus community development, traditional practice versus innovative approaches. By 7:30, she was dressed and driving downtown, her coffee growing cold as traffic crept along I-35. The Henderson and Associates building looked exactly the same, glass and steel monument to conventional success, but walking into the lobby felt like entering a previous life. Richard's office was on the 32nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Austin's skyline. He was waiting for her behind his massive mahogany desk, but he wasn't alone. David Henderson sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, looking smug and well-rested. Beside him sat a woman Madeline didn't recognize. 50s, expensive suit, briefcase, and the kind of razor-sharp attention that screamed high-powered attorney. "Madeline," Richard gestured to the remaining chair. "This is Patricia Morse, our legal counsel." "Mr. Henderson," Madeline said carefully, not moving toward the chair. "What's this about?" Patricia Morse opened her briefcase and withdrew a tablet. "Ms. Sullivan, are you currently employed by Donovan Group as Community Development Director?" "Yes." "And were you previously employed by this firm as a senior urban planner?" "Obviously." "Mrs. Sullivan," Richard's voice carried a warning, "I'd advise you to be very careful with your answers." Patricia consulted her tablet. "According to our records, you signed a comprehensive non-compete agreement when you joined Henderson and Associates. That agreement specifically prohibits you from working on urban development projects in the Austin metropolitan area for any competing firm for a period of 18 months after termination." Madeline felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "I'm not working for a competing firm. Donovan Group is a technology company. Donovan Group is developing a mixed-use campus that includes residential, commercial, and community components," David said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting weeks to spring this trap. That makes them a direct competitor for urban development projects in Austin. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the community engagement framework you've developed for Donovan Group incorporates methodologies and best practices that are proprietary to Henderson and Associates." "That's ridiculous. Community engagement isn't proprietary." "The specific framework you've created," Richard interrupted, "bears striking similarities to the Morrison project proposal you developed while employed here. Our intellectual property attorneys have identified at least 17 distinct elements that constitute trade secret violations." Madeline stared at him, finally understanding the scope of what was happening. "Oh, you're suing me?" "We're offering you a choice," Patricia said smoothly. "Cease all work on the Donovan Group project immediately and sign an amended non-disclosure agreement, or face litigation for breach of contract, trade secret theft, and intentional interference with business relationships." Intentional interference. David leaned forward, clearly enjoying himself. "The Morrison Group was very interested in the community engagement model you developed. After your departure from our firm, they specifically asked about working with the planner who'd created such an innovative approach. Imagine their surprise when they discovered that planner was now working for a competitor, using the same ideas on a competing project. The room was spinning. Madeline gripped the back of the leather chair, trying to process the implications. If Henderson and Associates could prove she'd used proprietary methods, they could not only force her off the Donovan Group project, but potentially destroy her career in urban planning entirely. "How long do I have to decide?" she managed. 48 hours, Patricia replied. "After that, we file in federal court, And if I comply with your demands, you resign from Donovan Group immediately, sign the amended agreements, and this conversation never happened, Richard said. You're free to pursue other career opportunities, as long as they don't involve urban development in Austin. Madeline looked around the office, at Richard's satisfied expression, David's barely concealed glee, the attorney's professional indifference. 3 months ago, this had been her world. Corporate politics, petty vendettas, and the kind of legal maneuvering that turned passion into profit and innovation into intellectual property disputes. I need to think about this, she said. Of course. But Madeline, Richard's voice carried a note of false sympathy. I hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's business. You chose to leave our firm and take our proprietary methods to a competitor. There have to be consequences. As Madeline walked out of the building, her phone buzzed with a text from Corbin. Community board meeting at 10 a.m. Transit hub designs are incredible. Can't wait for you to see them. She stared at the message, thinking about the community center packed with engaged residents, about legal commitments and binding agreements, about a project that could change how cities developed. Then she thought about federal lawsuits and career destruction and the 18 months of non-compete agreements she'd completely forgotten when she'd accepted Corbin's job offer. By the time she reached her car, Madeline realized she was crying. 2 hours later, she was sitting in her apartment, staring at her laptop screen and the resignation letter she'd started writing 6 times. Each attempt felt like surrendering not just a job, but an entire future she'd only just discovered was possible. Her phone rang. Corbin's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since she'd known him, she considered not answering. Hey, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Hey yourself, you missed the community board meeting. Maria Santos brought transit designs that are absolutely brilliant. Integrated bike repair, package pickup, even space for a farmer's market. His excitement was infectious, even through her despair. Where are you? Home. I need to talk to you about something. Okay. Should I come over? Yes, and Corbin, bring Sarah. We're going to need legal advice. After she hung up, Madeline sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the architectural books and urban planning texts that had shaped her entire career. On her coffee table sat the community engagement framework she'd developed with Corbin, months of collaborative work that might be about to destroy everything they'd built together. She thought about the architecture of chance, about building something beautiful from uncertainty and trust. But some structures, she was learning, could be demolished by the very foundation they were built on. When the knock came at her door 20 minutes later, Madeline took a deep breath and prepared to tell the man she loved that she might have to walk away from the best thing that had ever happened to her. Corbin's face went through a series of expressions as Madeline explained the morning's meeting: confusion, anger, and finally a cold fury that made his grey eyes look like winter storms. They're claiming your community engagement work is their intellectual property. Sarah Chen was pacing Madeline's small living room, her tablet in one hand and her phone in the other, already researching legal precedents. That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard since someone tried to patent the color blue. Ridiculous doesn't mean it won't work, Madeline said quietly. She was curled in the corner of her couch, still wearing the navy dress she'd put on for her meeting with Richard Henderson, but she felt like she'd aged years in the space of a few hours. Non-compete agreements in Texas are enforceable if they're reasonable in scope and duration. 18 months, Austin metropolitan area, urban development work, a judge could rule that's reasonable. Corbin sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from his body. What about the intellectual property claims? That's where it gets complicated. Madeline pulled up files on her laptop, showing them the Morrison project proposal she'd developed at Henderson and Associates. And I did create a community engagement framework for the Morrison project. It was innovative, comprehensive, and totally proprietary to my work there. And our framework? Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Uses the same core methodologies: community-driven design charrettes, stakeholder mapping, iterative feedback loops, legal accountability structures. Madeline's voice was flat, defeated. I didn't copy it directly, but the DNA is identical. Any intellectual property attorney could make the case that I stole trade secrets. The room was quiet, except for the sound of Sarah's rapid typing as she pulled up case law and precedent. Corbin was staring out the window at Austin's skyline, his jaw tight with the kind of controlled anger that suggested he was planning something. "Okay," Sarah said finally. "But the intellectual property claim is bullshit, but it's sophisticated bullshit. The non-compete is more problematic. When did you sign it?" 8 years ago, when I started at Henderson and Associates, but they had me sign an updated version last year when I got promoted to senior planner. Updated how? Madeline pulled up the document on her laptop. A broader scope, longer duration, more specific language about community engagement and innovative planning methodologies. Sarah read through the agreement, her expression growing grimmer. This is unusually comprehensive. Most non-competes in urban planning are pretty narrow. They prevent you from taking specific clients or working on identical projects. This one basically prevents you from practicing urban planning anywhere in Central Texas. Can they enforce it? Corbin asked. Probably. Texas courts generally uphold non-competes if they're reasonable in geographic scope, duration, and scope of work. 18 months. Austin metro area. Urban development that hits all the criteria. Madeline felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. So they can force me off the project. They can try. But there's another option. Sarah was typing again, pulling up corporate documents. What if you weren't an employee of Donovan Group? What if you were an independent contractor working for the Community Land Trust? I don't understand. The non-compete prevents you from working for competing firms in urban development, but it doesn't prevent you from working for community organizations. If the Community Land Trust hired you as an independent consultant, Henderson and Associates couldn't touch you. Corbin was already shaking his head. That's a technicality. Henderson's lawyers would see right through it. Maybe, but it would shift the legal burden. Instead of us trying to prove the non-compete doesn't apply, they'd have to prove that consulting for a community land trust constitutes working for a competing firm. Madeline's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Sullivan, this is Patricia Morse. Mr. Henderson wanted me to inform you that the Morrison Group has contacted us about potentially filing their own action for interference with prospective business relationships. I thought you should know that the timeline for resolution has become more urgent. She showed the message to Corbin and Sarah. The room went very quiet. They're escalating, Sarah said. Bringing in the Morrison Group means they're claiming you not only stole intellectual property, but used it to interfere with their business relationships. What does that mean practically? Corbin asked. It means they could seek immediate injunctive relief to stop the Donovan Group project entirely while the lawsuit is pending. It means instead of just forcing Madeline off the project, they could shut down the whole thing. Madeline felt the walls of her apartment closing in. This wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about the community they'd spent months engaging, the residents who'd been promised affordable housing and transit improvements, the innovative model of development that could be replicated in cities across the country. How is this possible? She said, more to herself than to anyone else. I created that framework. It came from my mind, my experience, my understanding of community engagement. How can someone else own that? Because you created it while employed by Henderson and Associates, Sarah said gently. Under work-for-hire doctrine, anything you develop during employment belongs to your employer, even if it's based on your personal expertise and experience. Corbin stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. Sir Richard Henderson gets to destroy a project that could change how cities develop because his nephew didn't get credit for Madeline's work. It's not about credit, Madeline said quietly. It's about power, about ensuring that innovation stays within traditional corporate structures instead of being used to empower communities. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email. Richard Henderson's name appeared in her inbox with the subject line, "Final Offer." Madeline, given the escalating legal complexity of this situation, we're prepared to make a final offer. Resign from Donovan Group immediately, sign the amended non-disclosure agreement, and we'll ensure that your departure doesn't impact the project timeline. Refuse, and we'll seek emergency injunctive relief on Friday that will shut down all Donovan Group development activity in Austin, pending resolution of our intellectual property claims. This isn't personal, it's business. Richard. Friday, Madeline said, showing them the email. They're filing for an injunction on Friday if I don't resign. That's 2 days, Sarah said. And 2 days to find a legal strategy that protects the project and keeps Madeline involved, Corbin corrected. But Madeline was already shaking her head. There is no legal strategy. They have me. The non-compete is valid, the intellectual property claim is credible, and they have the resources to fight this for years while our project dies in legal limbo. So what are you saying? Madeline looked at Corbin's face, seeing the desperation and anger there, knowing that her next words would devastate him. I'm saying I have to resign. I have to walk away from the project, from our partnership, from everything we've built together. No. His voice was flat, final. I won't accept that. Corbin, no. We'll find another way. We'll fight them. We'll destroy the project and hurt the community while we're fighting. Madeline stood, moving toward him. Those residents who came to our presentation, who trusted us with their neighborhood, they don't deserve to be collateral damage in a legal war. And you don't deserve to be sacrificed to Richard Henderson's ego. Maybe not. But sometimes the most important thing isn't what we deserve. Sometimes it's what we can live with. Corbin pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel his heart racing, could sense the desperation in his grip. "Oh, there has to be another way," he whispered into her hair. But as they stood together in her living room, surrounded by the remnants of their shared work and facing the systematic destruction of everything they'd built, Madeline couldn't see one. The architecture of chance, she was learning, sometimes required sacrifices that felt like tearing down everything beautiful you'd ever constructed. Outside her window, Austin stretched toward the horizon, a city full of possibilities and communities and the kind of innovative development that could change the world. But for the first time since she'd walked into that networking event months ago, Madeline couldn't see a path forward that didn't end in loss. At 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, Madeline gave up on sleep and made coffee instead. She'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible scenario, every potential legal maneuver, every way to save the project that didn't require her to walk away from it. She'd found exactly none. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the resignation letter finally completed after 2 days of drafting and redrafting. It was professional, brief, and utterly devastating to read. Dear Corbin, effective immediately. I am resigning from my position as Community Development Director with Donovan Group. Due to legal complications arising from my previous employment, I cannot continue to work on the East Austin campus project or any other Donovan Group development initiatives. I believe deeply in the vision we've developed together and trust that you will find a way to bring it to fruition. The community deserves nothing less. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of something extraordinary. Sincerely, Madeline Sullivan. She'd written it, deleted it, rewritten it, and finally saved it with a timestamp of 2:47 a.m. All that remained was pressing send. Her phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Maya told me about the work situation. Want to talk? Madeline stared at the message, surprised by how much she wanted to hear her brother's voice. They'd been talking more frequently since she'd started working for Corbin, slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been damaged by their family's collapse. She called him, "Hey." Leo's voice was soft, careful. "Rough night." "The worst." Madeline curled up in her chair, wrapping a blanket around herself. "I'm about to lose the best job I've ever had, the best work I've ever done, and probably the best relationship I've ever been in. All because I forgot about a piece of paper I signed 8 years ago. The non-compete thing. The non-compete thing. The intellectual property thing. The whole elaborate trap that Richard Henderson has been planning since I walked out of his office." Madeline's voice cracked slightly. "I should have seen it coming. I should have been more careful. Maddie." Leo's voice carried the kind of gentle authority that reminded her he'd grown up, become someone capable of offering real guidance. "Do you remember what you told me after Mom and Dad's divorce, when I was spiraling about not being able to control what happened to our family?" "No. You said that sometimes the most important thing isn't preventing bad things from happening. Sometimes it's deciding who you want to be when they do happen." Madeline was quiet, remembering that conversation. Leo had been 22, devastated by the financial chaos their father had left behind, angry at everyone and everything. She'd been 25, trying to hold her own life together while helping their mother navigate bankruptcy. "I remember," she said finally. "So who do you want to be in this situation? Someone who gives up because a bully with lawyers is making threats? Or someone who finds a way to fight for what matters?" "It's not that simple, Leo. If I fight, I could destroy the entire project. The community could lose everything because I'm too stubborn to walk away. Or the community could lose everything because you're too scared to stay." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm not scared. Aren't you? Because from where I sit, it sounds like you're doing exactly what you did after Dad left, building walls, choosing safety over possibility, protecting yourself from hurt by making sure you can't be hurt." Madeline felt tears starting, hot and angry and completely unexpected. "That's not what this is. Isn't it? You finally found someone who sees your worth, work that matters, a chance to build something extraordinary. And the moment it gets complicated, you're ready to walk away to protect everyone else." "I'm trying to do the right thing." "The right thing for who? For the community that's counting on you? For the man who loves you? Or for the scared part of yourself that would rather quit than risk failing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Madeline could hear her brother breathing on the other end of the line, waiting for her answer. "I don't know how to fight this, Leo. They have lawyers and money and time. I have a resignation letter and good intentions." "Then maybe you need to stop thinking like someone who's alone and start thinking like someone who has a partner." After she hung up with Leo, Madeline sat in her dark kitchen, thinking about partnerships and risks and the difference between protecting people and abandoning them. Outside her window, Austin was beginning to wake up. Early commuters, delivery trucks, the daily rhythm of a city that never quite stopped moving. She thought about the community center full of engaged residents, about transit hubs and affordable housing and the kind of innovative development that could change how cities grew. She thought about Corbin's face when he talked about proving that innovation and community weren't mutually exclusive. And she thought about the scared 25-year-old who'd learned that the people you trusted most could hide destructive secrets, who decided that the only way to feel safe was to control every variable. At 5:30 a.m., Madeline deleted the resignation letter and opened a new document. If she was going to fight, she needed to understand exactly what she was fighting against. She spent the next 2 hours reading through her non-compete agreement, researching Texas employment law, and mapping out every legal argument Henderson and Associates could make. By 7:30, she had a plan. It was risky, potentially career-ending, and required her to trust Corbin in a way that felt terrifying and necessary in equal measure. She called him Madeline. His voice was rough with sleep and worry. "Are you okay? I'm not resigning." "What? I'm not resigning. I'm not walking away from the project, from our partnership, from any of it." She was standing now, pacing her kitchen with the kind of nervous energy that felt like electricity. "But I need you to trust me completely, even if what I ask you to do doesn't make sense." "Okay." His response was immediate. "Certain." "What do you need?" "I need you to fire me." "I'm sorry, what?" "At 9 a.m. this morning, I need you to call an emergency board meeting and terminate my employment for breach of contract. Make it public, make it dramatic, make it look like you're furious with me." "Madeline, I don't understand." "Richard Henderson wants me out of the picture because he thinks I'm the source of our innovative approach to community development. He thinks if he removes me, the project becomes conventional corporate development that he can either copy or compete with." She was talking faster now, the plan crystallizing as she explained it. "But he's wrong. The innovation isn't coming from me. It's coming from the community partnership we've built. And if I'm not an employee of Donovan Group, I can't violate my non-compete agreement. You want to work as an independent contractor. I want to work for the Community Land Trust as their advocate and liaison. Henderson and Associates can't stop me from working for the community that's being developed for." Corbin was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "That's actually brilliant. But are you sure it'll work?" "I'm not sure of anything. But I'm sure that walking away isn't the answer." Madeline looked out her window at the city she'd grown to love, at the communities that deserved better than conventional development. "We built something extraordinary together, Corbin. I'm not ready to let Richard Henderson destroy it because I was too afraid to fight." "Then we fight, together. Even if it means I have to fire the woman I love on national television, even if." As she hung up the phone, Madeline realized she was crying again. But this time, the tears felt like relief, like finally choosing courage over safety, partnership over protection. The architecture of chance, she was learning, sometimes required you to tear down everything you thought you knew about yourself and build something entirely new from the rubble. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you didn't have to build it alone. The Donovan Group's emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the building's main conference room, the formal space with mahogany paneling and oil paintings that Corbin usually avoided in favor of the more collaborative spaces upstairs. But this morning required theater as much as substance, and theater demanded the right stage. Madeline arrived at 8:45, wearing her most professional suit and an expression that she hoped conveyed appropriate concern rather than barely controlled terror. The plan they developed over a series of frantic phone calls was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. "Miss Sullivan," Sarah Chen greeted her at the elevator, playing her role perfectly. "Mr. Donovan is asking for you in the conference room. He seems upset." They walked down the corridor together, Sarah maintaining the fiction that this was a crisis rather than a carefully orchestrated performance. Other employees watched them pass with the kind of curious concern that suggested word of the emergency meeting had already spread. The conference room was set up like a tribunal. Corbyn sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Sarah and two other board members Madeline recognized but had never met. Legal documents were spread across the table's surface, and a video camera was positioned to record the proceedings. "Ms. Sullivan," Corbyn's voice was cold, formal, nothing like the warmth she was used to hearing. "Please sit down." Madeline took the chair facing the camera, acutely aware that this performance would be reviewed by lawyers, judges, and potentially the media. Everything depended on making this look genuine. "And I've called this emergency meeting," Corbyn continued, "to address serious concerns that have come to light regarding your employment with Donovan Group and your work on the East Austin campus project." He slid a document across the table toward her. "This is a complaint filed by Henderson and Associates claiming that you violated your non-compete agreement and misappropriated their intellectual property in the development of our community engagement framework." Madeline picked up the document, scanning it with what she hoped looked like appropriate shock. "I don't understand. Everything I've done for Donovan Group has been original work." "Has it?" Corbyn's interruption was sharp. "Practiced. Because according to this complaint, the community engagement methodology you developed for our project is substantially identical to work you created while employed by Henderson and Associates. That's not true. The frameworks may be similar, but similar enough that our legal team is concerned about potential liability." Sarah's voice carried just the right note of professional concern. "Ms. Sullivan, when you accepted this position, did you disclose the existence of your non-compete agreement with Henderson and Associates?" This was the crucial moment. Madeline had to admit to a deception that was real while maintaining the fiction that everything else about her employment had been straightforward. "No. I didn't think it was relevant since Donovan Group is a technology company, not an urban planning firm." "Not relevant." Corbyn's anger sounded completely genuine, which was either excellent acting or actual frustration bleeding through their performance. "You didn't think it was relevant that you were legally prohibited from working on urban development projects in Austin? I thought the prohibition only applied to traditional planning firms." "You thought wrong." He stood, pacing behind the table in a way that suggested barely controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what this could cost us? The legal fees, the project delays, the potential damage to our reputation with the community." Madeline felt a chill run down her spine. Even knowing this was performance, Corbyn's disappointment felt real enough to hurt. "Mr. Donovan," she said carefully, "I believe we can fight these claims. My work for Donovan Group was original, innovative. Your work for Donovan Group has put our entire Austin operation at risk." Corbyn returned to his seat, his expression granite hard. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Donovan Group is terminated. You'll surrender all company materials, sign a separation agreement, and have no further involvement with any Donovan Group projects." The room was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft whir of the video camera. Madeline felt her heart racing, even though she'd known this moment was coming. "Sir," she said, "I'd like the opportunity to—" "There is no opportunity. The decision is final." Corbyn's voice carried absolute authority. "Sarah will escort you to collect your personal belongings. I expect your resignation letter and all company property returned within the hour." As scripted, Madeline stood slowly, her movements conveying shock and defeat. "What about the community engagement process? The residents we've been working with will be handled by qualified professionals who haven't jeopardized the entire project with undisclosed legal complications." The dismissal was brutal, even knowing it was theater. Madeline walked toward the door, then paused as if struck by a sudden thought. Mr. Donovan, what about the Community Land Trust, the oversight board we established? What about them? They're independent legal entities, community organizations. This situation with Henderson and Associates doesn't affect their ability to advocate for the neighborhood, does it? Corbyn's expression didn't change, but she caught the briefest flicker of something that might have been approval. No, the Community Land Trust operates independently of Donovan Group. Their advocacy work is entirely separate from our development activities. I see. Thank you for clarifying. 20 minutes later, Madeline was walking out of the Donovan Group building carrying a small box of personal items and a separation agreement that officially ended her employment. Behind her, the building hummed with activity, phones ringing, meetings happening, the normal rhythm of business continuing despite the drama of the morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Impressive performance. But this changes nothing. The non-compete still applies to any work you do in Austin. PM Patricia Morse, Henderson and Associates, attorney, had been watching the live stream of the termination. They'd anticipated this move and were already positioning to counter it. Madeline deleted the message and called the number she'd memorized that morning, the direct line for Maria Santos, chair of the Community Land Trust Board. Councilwoman Santos, this is Madeline Sullivan. I need to ask you about a job. 2 hours later, Madeline sat in the East Austin Community Center, facing the same residents who'd attended their project presentation weeks earlier. But this time, she wasn't representing Donovan Group. She was interviewing to become the Community Land Trust's advocacy coordinator, a position that would allow her to work directly for the neighborhood in ensuring that any development served their interests. Miss Sullivan, said Carmen Rodriguez, a long-time resident and community organizer. We're confused about what happened this morning. The news is saying you were fired from Donovan Group for legal problems. That's correct. I violated my employment agreement with my previous employer, and Mr. Donovan made the right decision to terminate my employment rather than risk the project. But you're here asking to work for us, added Marcus Williams, a young father who'd been one of the most engaged community members. Why would we want to hire someone who just got fired for legal problems? This was the test, whether the community would trust her enough to let her continue fighting for their project, even if she could no longer do it as a Donovan Group employee. And because, Madeline said, my legal problems are with a corporate law firm that wants to prevent communities from having real control over their own development. They're trying to stop me from working on this project because they're afraid of what we've built together. A model that puts residents first instead of profit margins. And working for the Community Land Trust gets around these legal problems, asked Elena Vasquez, an elderly woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. It should. My former employer can prevent me from working for competing developers, but they can't prevent me from working for the community that's being developed for. The question is whether you trust me to advocate for your interests, even though doing so might mean continued legal battles. The room was quiet as residents exchanged glances, weighing their options. Finally, Carmen Rodriguez spoke. Ms. Sullivan, in all the years we've been fighting for affordable housing and community control, no developer has ever put their promises in writing the way you and Mr. Donovan did. No one has ever given us legal authority over our own neighborhood's development. She paused, looking around the room at her neighbors. If Henderson and Associates is trying to stop you from working with us, that tells me you're doing something right. The question is whether you're willing to keep fighting, even if it gets messy. Madeline thought about Richard Henderson's smug satisfaction, about David's predatory smile, about all the compromises and defeats she'd accepted over the years in the name of professional safety. I'm willing to fight, she said, as long as you're willing to have me. The vote was unanimous. As Madeline walked out of the community center that afternoon, officially employed by the East Austin Community Land Trust and ready to continue the battle for innovative development, her phone rang. Corbin's name appeared on the screen. "How did it go?" he asked. "I got the job. We're still partners, just with different business cards." "And Henderson and Associates? We'll probably file for an injunction to stop me from working for the Community Land Trust. But now they'll have to argue that advocating for affordable housing constitutes competitive development activity, which is a much harder case to make. Much harder, but not impossible." Madeline looked back at the community center, where residents were already planning their next meeting. "Corbin, yeah? Thank you for trusting me enough to fire me on national television." His laugh was warm, genuine, nothing like the cold authority he'd displayed that morning. "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me." The architecture of chance, Madeline was learning, sometimes required you to tear down everything you'd built just to discover that the foundation was strong enough to support something even better. 6 months later, Madeline stood on the site of what would become the East Austin Community Campus, watching a group of teenagers install the first solar panels on what would eventually be the neighborhood's new community center. The foundation had been poured 3 weeks earlier, and the steel framework was beginning to rise, not the gleaming corporate tower originally envisioned, but something more integrated, more organic, more authentically connected to the community it would serve. "The transit hub design is incredible," said Carmen Rodriguez, joining Madeline near the construction fence. "Though who knew that a bus stop could include bike repair, community gardens, and space for quinceañera planning?" "The teenagers knew," Madeline replied, watching a young woman explain solar panel installation to a group of curious neighbors. "Turns out when you actually ask people what they need, they come up with solutions that would never occur to professional planners." The legal battle with Henderson and Associates had lasted 4 months and had been covered extensively in the local and national press. In the end, a federal judge had ruled that community advocacy could not be considered competitive development activity, establishing a precedent that was already being cited in similar cases across the country. Richard Henderson had been forced to settle and pay the Community Land Trust's legal fees, while David Henderson had been quietly reassigned to less visible projects within the firm. More importantly, the community-driven development model they'd pioneered in East Austin was being replicated in 12 other cities, with community land trusts from Portland to Miami requesting Madeline's consultation on engagement frameworks and resident advocacy strategies. "Ms. Sullivan?" Marcus Williams approached, carrying architectural plans and wearing a hard hat that read Community Construction Coordinator, a paid position the project had created to ensure local hiring and training. "The affordable housing buildings are ahead of schedule, and the families selected for the first units want to know when they can start planning their community gardens." "Gardens first, then housing," Madeline said, grinning. That was the community's priority, remember. As Marcus headed back to coordinate with the construction crews, Madeline's phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Saw the Architectural Digest article about the project. Mom cried reading about the community ownership model. You're changing the world, sis." The article had been published the previous week, part of a special issue on innovative urban development. But more meaningful to Madeline were the letters she'd received from urban planning students, community organizers, and residents of neighborhoods facing gentrification pressure, all asking how they could adapt the East Austin model to their own communities. "Admiring your empire," Corbin's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and just a hint of teasing. Madeline turned to find him approaching from the construction trailer that served as the project's temporary headquarters. He was wearing jeans, work boots, and a Donovan Group t-shirt that had gotten genuinely dirty from his morning spent reviewing foundation work with the engineers. "Not my empire," she corrected, moving into his arms. "Our collaborative experiment in whether innovation and community can actually coexist." And the verdict? Still pending. But the early returns are promising. They stood together, watching the construction site bustle with activity, local workers learning solar installation, teenagers leading architecture workshops, families planning gardens that would feed the neighborhood. It was messy and organic and completely different from the sterile corporate development Madeleine had imagined when she'd first heard Corbyn's presentation months earlier. "Any regrets?" Corbyn asked. "About the career change, the legal battles, the complete upheaval of your carefully planned life?" Madeleine considered the question seriously. Her work now was more challenging and less financially secure than her corporate planning career had been. She spent her days mediating between construction crews and community concerns, writing grant proposals and legal briefs, troubleshooting problems that had no precedent and no clear solutions. It was also the most fulfilling work she'd ever done. "Only one regret," she said finally. "Yeah? I regret that it took me 31 years to learn that the most important architecture isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about building foundations strong enough to support whatever emerges." Corbyn kissed her temple, his arms tightening around her. "Speaking of foundations." Something in his tone made her look up at him. His expression was nervous, excited, and completely transparent in the way that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Corbyn Donovan, are you about to propose to me in the middle of a construction site?" "I was thinking more like on top of a construction site." He gestured toward the community center's rising steel framework. "There's a beam up there that's going to support the roof of the main community meeting space. I thought it might be nice to make a promise on the foundation of something we built together." Madeleine looked at the construction site, then back at his face. "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or a serious OSHA violation." "Definitely both." 20 minutes later, they were standing on a steel beam 30 feet above the construction site, wearing safety harnesses and hard hats, looking out over the East Austin neighborhood that was being transformed by resident-driven development. Below them, community members and construction workers had gathered to watch what was either a proposal or an elaborate workplace safety demonstration. "Madeleine Sullivan," Corbyn said, pulling a ring box from his pocket while maintaining his grip on the safety line. "Will you marry me and spend the rest of your life building impossible things with me?" "Define impossible," she said, though she was already crying and laughing simultaneously. "Community-controlled development, technology that serves neighborhoods instead of displacing them, love that makes both partners stronger instead of smaller." He opened the ring box to reveal a simple band with a small, perfect diamond. "A marriage between two people who believe that the best architecture emerges from collaboration and trust." Madeleine looked at the ring, then at Corbyn's face, then out at the community below them, residents and workers, and the organic chaos of people building something beautiful together. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "Yes to all of it." As Corbyn slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her 30 feet above the foundation of a community center that would serve families for generations, the crowd below erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started playing music from a construction radio, and what had been a proposal became an impromptu celebration. But for Madeleine, the real celebration was quieter and more profound. Standing on the beam that would support a space designed by and for the community it served, she realized she'd finally learned the most important lesson about architecture and life. The most beautiful structures weren't the ones you could control completely, but the ones you built with enough trust and courage to let them become whatever they needed to be. 3 years later, the East Austin Community Campus was featured on the cover of Urban Planning Quarterly as the future of community-driven development. Madeline Sullivan Donovan, listed as co-author of the cover story, was 6 months pregnant and serving as director of the National Community Land Trust Initiative, helping neighborhoods across the country implement resident-controlled development models. But on this particular morning, she was sitting in the campus's central plaza with her laptop, working on a grant proposal while watching toddlers play in the community garden that residents had designed and built themselves. The architecture around her was a perfect blend of efficiency and warmth, solar-powered buildings, rain collection systems, and gathering spaces that hummed with the daily rhythm of authentic community life. Corbin found her there, as he often did, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the plaza's community-owned cafe and wearing the slightly bemused expression of someone who still couldn't quite believe their good fortune. "Working on the Portland proposal?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench. They want to adapt our model for a waterfront development that includes artist housing and light manufacturing space." Ambitious. The best projects usually are. Madeline saved her work and closed the laptop, leaning into Corbin's warmth. "How was the city council meeting?" "They approved the South Austin expansion unanimously. Apparently, other neighborhoods have been demanding community land trust options ever since they saw what we accomplished here." Around them, the plaza buzzed with the kind of organic activity that proved their model was working. Elderly residents playing dominoes under shade trees, teenagers working on a mural that would tell the neighborhood's history, young families sharing lunch at communal tables. It was exactly what they'd envisioned during those late nights in conference rooms, filled with maps and dreams. "Any regrets?" Corbin asked, echoing the question he'd posed 3 years earlier. Madeline considered it seriously, as she always did. Her life now was messier and more unpredictable than anything she could have planned. Marriage to someone who still operated on inspired chaos, work that required constant innovation and problem-solving, a baby on the way who would grow up in a world they were actively reshaping. "Just one," she said, placing his hand on her growing belly. "What's that? I regret that we can't be here to see what this place becomes in 50 years. What the kids playing in that garden will build when it's their turn to design the future." Corbin kissed the top of her head, his hand warm on her stomach where their child was growing. "Oh, we'll just have to trust that we're building the foundation for something extraordinary." And as they sat together in the plaza they'd helped create, watching a community that had learned to build its own future, Madeline realized that trust in each other, in the community, in the beautiful uncertainty of what could emerge when people came together with courage and vision, was indeed the most important architecture of all. The architecture of chance, she now understood, wasn't about abandoning plans entirely. It was about building foundations strong enough to support whatever beautiful, unexpected, necessary thing wanted to grow. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.